I think we can all agree that Mario Odyssey made a very interesting and fun game mechanic where you can capture opponents and use their movesets to further your goals. It happens to be that Unreal Engine kind of provides you with a very strong framework to copy that over without too much trouble, because you have player controllers, which actually is the thing that you're controlling as the player, which then sends through information to the possessed pawn, which is exactly the way Mario Odyssey works. So let's try to recreate a basic setup for that in Unreal Engine. I have downloaded a couple of Paragon characters here. You can see that they use the old input system. We'll change that over in a moment, but we'll have a couple of different characters that we can possess and change between. Our basic character here, we will just ignore that error for the time being, is just going to be our usual mannequin, and this is going to be able to possess those Paragon characters. So let's take a look at all that. If we go into the third person folder here, into blueprint, we've got our third person character blueprint, and that just has a couple of basic things that it sets up. We need to change a thing about this real quickly, because as you can see, we set the mapping context here in this blueprint. We're going to change that over to setting those in the player controller instead, because we want to deal with those mapping inputs on the player controller and then decide what those mapping inputs actually do on a blueprint by blueprint basis, for the most part. So let's make a custom player controller, and this will be our blueprint player controller capture, something like that. And then in our game mode, we're going to set that to being our default player controller that we have here. And then we'll go back into the third person character, and we'll just kind of take all this and we'll remove the custom to player controller, and we'll just kind of cut this out of here and go into our blueprint player controller in its begin play and paste that in here. We don't actually need to check if this is valid, because it always will be. There's always going to be our enhanced input local player subsystem, and we actually want to just get, and we just can provide that with a reference to self in this case, because this blueprint itself is a player controller, and that will then set up our input mappings. If you are not entirely familiar with setting up input mappings in Unreal Engine, I have a specific video about that. I'm going to try to remember to link to that. If it's not in the description or the pinned comment below and I'll add it. For now though, we just have our normal mappings, which is jump, move, and look. You can add as many input actions and as many mappings for those as you want to, of course. For now, I think we're just going to do these, and I'm going to make one more. So we'll go in here, just copy over one of these actions. Maybe actually don't copy over the move one, move over to copying the jump one, and we'll call this input action attack. So we can add a mapping for that as well. So input action attack, and I'm assuming we don't have anything on the left mouse button yet. I don't think we do. So let's just add that real quick, and that way we can also do an attack. And actually we also need another one, and that is cancel possess, because of course we need to be able to cancel possessing a certain character to go back to our main player character. So let's add that mapping as well. This will be cancel possess, and we'll say that that's just for now mapped to the right mouse button, just to make things easy. So now our player controller will have those input mappings, and whatever pawn we're controlling or whatever character we're controlling will be able to use those input actions as events that we can trigger and put custom code into. So in here we don't need to begin play anymore. We have this input action for look, and that just adds controller inputs for the yaw and the pitch, which effectively just rotates your camera. We've got movement input and we've got the jump input. We can also now add an input action for attacking on this guy, and for this that's just simply going to be the way we end up possessing things, but we'll get back to that in a moment. Now, there's a few ways that we can go about doing this. We can make a character blueprint, something like BP possessable character, that has pretty much this exact same movement code replicated over to it. Or we can just use this as the base for everything in the game. And instead of having the BP third person character itself be the player character, we'll make a chart off of that as well. So that's the way that we're going to do this, because that makes a little bit more sense to me. So we'll go into the blueprint and we'll rename third person character to BP possessable, that's spelled wrong, character. And you will note that we still can move around and everything, because we are setting up the input controls in the player character, and we're working with that, and then that same code still perfectly runs. But now we're going to create a child blueprint class of this, and this will be our third person character. And this one is going to then also have the attacking code in it. So we'll just call this third person. We go into this event graph. You'll see there's nothing in here. It still will have all of those input actions from before. You can override those if you want to, but if you just want them to function the exact same way, you just don't have to do anything at this point. So we can kind of just remove all of this, and we can just add the input action for attack, at which point, like when we trigger this, we can like spawn in a projectile that does things for possessing. So let's make that projectile, shall we? Let's make this a blueprint class. It'll be a normal actor. This will be BP possess bullets. And we'll just give this a static mesh with a sphere. And we'll also give it a collider, a sphere collision here. Make it a little bit bigger. The mesh here is just for visualization purposes for the time being. The sphere here is actually the thing that's going to be firing our events. So if we have actor begin overlap, we don't need begin play or tick in this case. We just check if the other character, we just cast that to our possessable character to check whether or not we're overlapping with anything that is a possessable character. If something is a possessable character, we get the player controller and we simply possess set pawn. And that's kind of all there is to it. And then we'll also destroy this actor itself, this bullet. And let's make this a projectile as well. So we can add a projectile movement component to it fairly easily. We can just give this an initial speed of like, I don't know, 1,000. That might be a little too much. Let's actually go for 500. And if you keep the max speed at 0, it'll be unbound. So that's good. And that's really all there is to it, I believe. So back in our third person character, when we attack, we want to spawn a actor from class, and we're going to be spawning our possessing bullets. And we'll get just exactly the same transform from our character, I guess. But we'll actually split the structure pin up a little bit, because what we'll do is the rotation and the scale will be the same, but our location will be a location plus like XYZ, let's say, I don't know, like 250 more in the Z, so that we fire it from like up here-ish. It's just a very fast and easy way to do that. And then in order for this bullet to know what it belongs to, what character it belongs to, we can put in either a instigator or a owner object. For this purpose, it's effectively the same thing. Owner is more so used for replication related purposes, it says here. And an instigator is usually used more so for things like damage and other gameplay events. So it doesn't really matter. Either way, you can use both of them or either one of them, but you just get a reference to self. I'm going to put it into instigator. And then we also want to check in our BP overlap here, whether or not the thing that we're overlapping is the same actor as our instigator. So we can just get instigator. And we want to check whether or not our overlapping actor is the thing that shot this thing to begin with. Because obviously we don't want to possess the thing itself and then destroy the bullet right away. So only if whatever we're overlapping with is not the instigator will we even like do the casting and then the possessing and then the destroy actor. So now to be sure, in the game mode blueprint, we do need to set our default pawn from our possessable character, which is what it was by default, to our newly made third person character, the child class that we made ourselves. And now if we play the game, we can see that we can start shooting some of these bullets. 250 might have been a little bit too much extra height to be giving it. And I think we also definitely need to give it more speed. So let's go back into our BP possessed bullets. And we can just give this a little bit more speed. Let's set it to 1500. In our third person character, let's just set this to 100 instead. And maybe this entire sphere can also just be a little bit smaller. So let's set this to like half the size or something like that. Now it is worth noting that I put this into the trigger out of a force of habit mostly. This will occur after one or more ticks of processing, it says. This effectively will trigger over and over and over and over again as long as the button is held down, which is not what we want. What we actually want is we want this to be started. So only on the first initial click of our mouse button will it fire one of the bullets. So now we can see that we can fire these bullets and they fire out of my face effectively, which is kind of nice. So now we get into the actual possessing of things. We've done a lot of setup. From here on out, it's actually going to be remarkably easy. So let's open up one of these Paragon characters. I had like Paragon Crunch here, characters. If you want the project files with everything set up and working, there will be a link down below in the description to the Patreon and for YouTube members to download it. But here we have one of the Paragon blueprints, which, as I said, it has all of this old input code that we're not going to be using. So we can effectively just like destroy all of this because we're not going to be using it. We can take a look at these attacks in a moment if we want to, but we're not going to be using this old input system for that either. Then, important is we're going to come up here into the class settings, and the parent class is set to character. We're going to change that to be our BP possessable character, the thing that we made. So now it will inherit all of that movement code that exists in our BP possessable character with the enhanced input system. If we want to do any different movement for any specific different character, we can just add these input actions to that blueprint and add our own custom code to it. But if we don't do anything, it'll just inherit the basic movement that we have here. Such as, for instance, we want to add the input action for attacking here. So when we press this, it already has a basic like attack montage with attack counter setup here. Works well enough. We can just plug that into our attacking input action, and that will just straight up work now. So let's put one of these into the world, and you will note that if I shoot this thing now, it does a intro animation, which is really kind of cool. If I shoot this thing now, I become this thing, which is really, really quite nice. And I can, with the same mouse button that I used to shoot the bullet with in that character over there, I can now use these to do the attacking animations as is set up in the attacking function there. We can't unpossess quite yet though, so let's actually take care of all of that. So in Mario Odyssey, when you possess something, Mario disappears, and when you unpossess him, he reappears. There's a lot of different ways that we could do this. It really depends a lot on how you're making your game, on what type of game you're making. The easiest, most straightforward way that we're going to do right now is just deleting the character when we possess something else and then respawning in the character when we want to unpossess. Do note that if you have any variables that keep track of things on the character blueprint itself, of course you're going to lose track of that information. So if you need to keep some information on variables around on that character blueprint, you either need to move those over to the character controller, or instead what you could do is you could just make the character invisible and then re-trigger it becoming visible again once you unpossess, and just change the character location to match to where you are at the moment. Both of those options are honestly fine. Just destroying and respawning things in is a little bit easier to show off for right now. But do know that this is probably a slightly more bothersome way to scale things up once you start dealing with things like having your character's health. Although I would argue for this, you probably want the character health actually on the controller so that you can also receive damage while possessing things. All that beside the point. Let's go into our possessed bullets, and when we possess, before we do any of that, we actually want to get the instigator and then also destroy that. We can do this either before or after the possessing. I like to do it after, because otherwise there might be a possibility of there being like something weird going on with the player controller not having a possessed pawn for like a split second. So here we possess it first and then we destroy the thing that we were just possessing before. And then in our possessable character, you can do this on a per character basis as well if you want to. It makes the most sense to me to do this in the possessable character. We can put in the input action for cancel possess. And what that will do is on started, it will spawn an actor from class. And what it will spawn is our third person character. Spawn transform will be our get actor transform. And we're going to be splitting this up again a little bit. So what we'll end up doing here is we'll split the structure pin, we'll get the rotation, and the scale will be the exact same. Actually, we can just set the scale to 1, 1, 1. We don't need to copy that over in case something weird happens with the scale while possessing. When we unpossess, obviously, we want the scale to always just be 1, 1, 1. Then we get the character's location that we're possessing at the moment. And we're going to be adding something to that. And what we'll be adding is we will be adding the forward vector with getActorForwardVector. And we will be multiplying that with a float. So you can right click this and change this to a float. Let's say about 100 units. So this will generate 100 units in front of the actual character if we add that to the location itself. So now when we unpossess, what will happen is we'll spawn in our like base third-person character 100 units in front of the character that we were just possessing, based on whatever rotation it had. And after we spawn this thing in, we get the player controller again, and all that we then need to do is we just again need to possess that thing as well. And that is really everything there is to it. So now I can possess this thing, and then when I right click, you can see, by the way, my player character is done, but when I right click, I probably need a little bit more than 100 units in front, but I now am possessed again, and then I can possess him again, if I can hit him, that is. There we go. And my player character is gone again, and I've got this thing that I have possessed. I can right click, unpossess, and so on and so forth. But yeah, I think 100 units might have been a little too close, so let's upgrade this to like 500 instead. It's a little bit trial and error depending on your specific characters and what size they are at and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, 500 is definitely too much. Again, there's some trial and error involved here. Let's say we want to do like 225. Is that a random number that I just came up with? Yes, that's just a random number that I just came up with. Welcome to programming. Now, there's one last thing that you will take note of, and that is that I can create infinite clones of myself now, because, and this is quite important, we have the third-person character also being a child of possessable character. So this is the easiest way to fix that, is going into the third-person character and just adding a input action for cancel possess, and then we need to add something that doesn't actually do anything to this started bin. And the easiest way to do that is just to make a empty function. So we'll just make a new function and plug that into the started. It's a little bit of a hacky way to do it, I will be the first to admit, but now we can see if we right click, nothing actually happens, but now right clicking this still unpossesses. So from here on, you can scale this up however you like. So we can add in, instead of just this Paragon character, we have this other Paragon character as well. So we can go here, Heroes, Greystone, open this up. All of this input related code, just like before, we can just kind of get rid of because it all uses the old input system. We simply use the input action for attack here instead. And we do that on started, put that into the combo system setup, which is pretty much the exact same as we had before. But again, you can like put different stuff in here. You can like spawn Fireball or whatever and make any ability you want execute through here. You can even use the gameplay ability system to execute specific abilities here if you wanted to. And then the most important part is going into the class settings and making sure that this is marked as a child of BP possessable character. So now we have two of these, and I can say, hey, I want to capture you. So now I'm walking around as Greystone, and I can do his attacks. And then when I'm done doing all that, I can unpossess, and I can say, actually, I want to be this robot guy, and I can use him. And now I'm done with that, and I can keep going, and I want to be Greystone again, and so on and so forth. So we effectively have a functional Mario Odyssey system. It's a little bit of debugging needed, obviously, as you can see, because they seem to specifically be using your inputs for their animation blueprints. So you probably want to also set those values like back to 0 on unpossessing and that kind of stuff. But that's all a little bit more granular than I'm going to be spending time on right here now today. So hopefully it's been helpful. If it has been, consider joining the Patreon and getting the project file here that I have set up with these two possessable characters, just to play around with it a little bit, support the channel, support these videos. Next time I'll be back with some more cool stuff. I'll see you then. And a very big thank you to all of my Patreons. You can see them on screen right now. If you want to help out supporting the channel, there's a link down below in the description to the Patreon page. A huge thank you to my Cave Student tier supporters, Earl Monseval Erno, and my Cave Digger tier supporters, Sir J. Thomas,